When I joined, it was Tawagga, and one of the first things I was asked was, what corps do you want? And I said infantry. And the corporal that was our section leader or trainer said, no, think of something else. The national servicemen are about to start and they're all going to infantry, so we need to put things up. And so I thought, well, no, I want to go to infantry. So I just did the best I could, and towards the end of the course, he came and caught me, and he said, platoon commander wants to see you. So we were walking over, and he said, oh, by the way, you've got the Best Soldiers Award for the platoon. And I just looked at him and said, does that mean I get infantry? And he said, that means you get whatever you bloody well want. So in actual fact, the bloke who came second to me, Greg Morks, he also got infantry. And when we did, so I topped that course and he came second. In the infantry training, he topped the course and I came second. And we both ended up in 3 Battalion. When we got to 3 Battalion, they basically said, well, we're putting regulars into support company. So initially, I went to Signal Platoon and he went to Mortar Platoon. And then I had 2 trips back to Ingleburn to do the training there, and I topped both of them, so that I actually got promoted to Lance Corporal after 12 months, which was almost unheard of in the Army in those days. And then did more courses, and we were very rarely in South Australia. We were forever off somewhere, like we went to Tasmania for the Hobart Fires of '67. Flew down there to provide communications because there weren't any communications for the Army fire teams that were helping out. So, mostly a week, maybe 2 weeks at the most at home in the base, and then you're either off on exercise, being the enemy. We had a train trip from Adelaide to Rockhampton, troop train. Changed 5 days it took us, and we were going up there to be the enemy of the 1st Barrawinga. And so it was good. It was, you were always doing something. At that stage, it was still sort of pro the troops and the war. And there was a genuine belief in the country that if we didn't stop them there, then they'd keep coming. And also with the other troubles that were happening with Indonesia with their communist tendencies at the time. So there was, and you thought, right, yes, it needs to be done. It was one of those things that needs to be done. So yeah, I had no problem that, yes, that's what needs to be done, so I want to be one of the ones that goes and does it. If we go back to the start of the year in '67, I went and saw my platoon commander, the regimental signals officer, and said, oh, sir, can I put in for a particular set of leave dates this year? He said, well, why? I said, because I want to get married. He said, oh, right. So he said, go down and talk to the company clerk and he will run through where we're going to be. And when we looked down, we were aiming for the 12th of December was what our intentions were. But on the program on the 12th of December, we were going to be on an exercise somewhere. And there was only 1 2-week period in that whole year when we were going to be in Adelaide. So I said, right, at the middle of that's when we'll get married, put in, got the leave approved. As it turned out, we were on what became our last exercise in October in South Australia, when listening to the radio one morning, they said, oh, 3 Battalion is going to Vietnam in December. And even the CO, because I was his radio operator then, did not know. So he made a few phone calls and then he left and went to Canberra to find out what the hell was going on. And it had been announced in Parliament the night before. So I went out on the advance party because I was a CO SIG, he was on that party, and we flew out on the 10th of December. The boat sailed Sydney sailed on the 11th from Adelaide. So as the advance party, we were forewarned, right, when you get there, you'll have 2 days inside another unit's base before we move you out on your own. We landed, we're put into trucks and we're driving through Nui Dat, and all of a sudden we're driving through barbed wire and out into the open. And another kilometre and a half down the road, we stopped, and there's these partially constructed huts, and this is your base. And where's the other unit we're supposed to be sharing with for a while? That was it, the 100 of us there, and this was going to be the battalion base. And the area we just crossed through later on would become where the Armoured Corps moved the tanks into. But yeah, so it was an interesting first few days. I mean, we had to put our own patrols out to guard the structures that were there, and then the engineering equipment that was left overnight. And the first night, I think we had at least 3 stand twos. Probably one of them was a genuine probe to see what was there, and the other 2 were shooting at shadows. And I'd say there was about 5 days, 5 nights that happened every night. 1 or 2, and most of the time it was probably shadows that we were jumping because we were inexperienced. I mean, I'd say the whole battalion only had, I'd say it'd be lucky to have 5% who had experienced battle at the time.
How big's the advance party?
100. So it's, it was, well, nearly 10% of, a bit over 10% of the battalion. Well, there was people from every company. So you had people that were responsible to set up their own areas and look after them, so that when their troops moved in, the rest moved in, they could all move in and be there, and you'd have people who knew what was going on and why and where and how. The typical day, I mean, you have, we even had full stand twos inside Nui Dat initially, but that was only for the first couple of days, and then it was just the perimeter used to stand to. But we were only, I think it was day 4 after the battalion arrived, we were out on a first battalion-sized operation. It was the settling in operation that every battalion did. It was an area where there were known to be few people, and so we had our first 4 days, and we were out and into it. And then back, and there were a lot of company-sized operations with sometimes the battalion headquarters went along, sometimes it didn't, but basically very rarely were we in, I think I could count on one hand the number of times we were in base more than 4 days in a row. There was once later on in the year, we were the only battalion, I think, that did not get wherever the individuals didn't get the 6 days rest in country breaks. You got your R&R, but there was also supposed to be a 6-day rest in where you went down to Vung Tau and with the rest centre there. We just never got that. But the Jim Shelton, who was the CO, brilliant CO, I'd follow him anywhere. At one stage he told headquarters that he was keeping the battalion in base for 8 days, and he would send all of his companies down for 2 days at a time at Vung Tau. And split the support company guys up amongst, they went with the companies they were normally working with. So he was excellent, but that was the only time the battalion actually took 8 days and said, we're not going out shooting people. At one stage there, I got, the companies were out, battalion headquarters were in, and they said, oh, well, the company clerk for A Company has just been promoted to corporal. We'd like you to take him out on a TAO patrol, tactical area of responsibility. We put out about 6 a night, 4 to 6 men. Your main job was just observation and report back so that nothing could sneak in. We want you to take him out and show him how to run a patrol. Okay, I've never done one. Yeah, well, and I've been a corporal at that stage, I think, for a whole of 5 or 6 weeks. So I'm just a little bit senior to him. So I went down, yep, we can do this. Got the place where they wanted us to go, went down, met the patrol. There was him. There was 2 guys that had been there from the start with us. No, one had come over from one of the other battalions for some reason, and I don't know why. I think he'd been in hospital and came to us. One that had been from the start, and 2 that had just arrived. They were going to replace some of the national service intake that was going home. We went out, got out to a spot where I thought, yeah, this would make a nice spot. We've got a bit of an old paddy bun there we can get behind to look after for a bit of protection if we need it. And right in a corner and a solid stone grave behind us. And so I did the resection and all that. Then we moved on 500 or 600 metres, sat down, cooked our dinner, put up a little hoochie, waved goodbye to the locals as they headed out of the paddy fields and went back to the village. And as soon as it was dark and they were all gone, went straight back to where we were supposed to be. And at 9:10 we had a roster, so we were all sort of, somebody was watching all the time. 9:10, the bloke was coming out, woke me up, and he said, "We've got people out there." So we just sat there, and then there was definitely sounds right near us, and we could sort of see stuff. And I thought, righto, we called in illumination from the artillery, and I asked, I said, "Well, where's it supposed to go off?" He said, "Well, if you're where you say you are, it'll be right over the top of your head," and it was. And with that started the fight.
So which fight's this?
This is just the 6 of us and God knows how many of them. We were exchanging stuff for small, not a lot, but because they never tried to attack, they just kept their heads down, and we made sure they didn't come any closer. And then at one stage, and that was going on till was after 2 o'clock. You know, so we were going for at least 4 or 5 hours, and one of the illumination, which they kept over, so good. Went way off beam, and it was out over these paddy fields, and I saw a group there of about 40. They're running, they're leaving. So I started calling the artillery on to because I'd set up fire plans and all that, and I remember I was just about to call the last round where I reckon they would have been, and a flare went off straight over the head again, and they weren't leaving. They were extras coming in. And I'll never forget it. It was right 300, drop 600, enemy assault line, 5 rounds, fire for effect. And they did. And I kept my eyes above the bun just long enough to see the first round right in amongst them, and said, "Right 50, repeat." And they just landed right in amongst them. And those artillery boys really did. I mean, we would have gone. There was no way we could have taken that 40 with what we had, when they'd also started shooting from the other side of us. And then after that, it went quiet for a long while. They sent out a helicopter who flew around and shot up all the ground all around us. And next morning, they said, "Well, you're coming back," and I'm not moving from here till somebody comes out and tells me there's nothing hiding around me. And a helicopter flew out. There was a little bell flew out, and he landed. And I said, "Right, if he landed, we're safe." They would have shot him. We did a sweep. There have been 19 spots where little spots where there was ammunition around us. So we'd had a fair group. I was always wondering why nobody came out to save us. And when I got back, I did a debrief, and we got a good debrief. It was Major Stewart, the admin company guy, and he said, "Well, we had 2 companies, one by helicopters, one by armoured personnel carrier ready to go, but we believe you were being used as bait for a trap for a larger ambush. So we were just sitting there waiting." And so, so we,
An eventful first patrol, Jeff.
it was... I was the first corporal to be in command of a unit in 3 Battalion. It was just before the Tet Offensive. This is all in 68. 67, basically, we were waiting for the battalion to arrive, and we did that first little battalion-sized operation. Yeah, and the Tet Offensive, well, at that stage, it was supposed to be a truce for 4 days. 2 Battalion and 7 Battalion were both somewhere in Benoit. Charlie Company 3 Ra was the fire support base protection for 2 Battalion. Delta Company was out somewhere in the west of the province by themselves. Bravo, I'm not sure where they were, but they were not in base. Alpha Company 3R was the only infantry company in Nui Dat when the Tet Offensive hit. And we were obviously the Ready Reaction Company. The call for that was the company was to go to Berea to defend the province headquarters, the South Vietnamese province headquarters in the Berea being the capital of the province. There was 6 APCs, so not enough to take a full company. So we loaded up, and at that stage I was lent to them as an extra radio operator because there was a lot going on, and the boss figured he wasn't going anywhere, so he was sitting in a command post with radio operators all around him. And actually none was an extra because the radio operator that was there was due to go home 5 days later. He was one of the national servicemen. So I was lent to them so that he could come out and not go walking into something when he's only got 5 days to go. Horry Howard was company commander, and as we were travelling down the highway in these APCs, we got about 400 metres from the start of the town, and Horry said, "No, stop, right, everybody out of the APCs." Now, he said that because while we're in the APCs, the second lieutenant from the Armoured Corps was in command. The minute we got out of the APCs, Horry Howard was in command. Turned out to be one of the best moves he ever made. We hadn't gone 50 metres and the first 3 APCs were hit by RPGs. The town had already been captured by D445 VC battalion. But probably the advantage we had, because there was 60 of us, was that they'd already captured it and were spread out throughout the town. So we just progressively over the next 3.5 days took it back. I know there was one stage where, and I was still carrying the radio then, an American voice came over asking, "Is there anything you could do to help?" I said, "Who the hell are you?" And he said, "Look up." And there were a pair of Phantoms sitting up there. "All right, yes," to ask the boss. They said, "Yeah, the picture theatre there. There's a bunch in there. We don't know how many, but they're just too many for us to." And they just came in and put a few. Well, the first bomb they missed, went straight over the top and landed in what was the laundry where they did all the task force greens. So there were greens everywhere for a while. Then they hit it with rockets, and that was just finished it. Peter Fraser from 2 Platoon, and there were 18 of us, I was down there with them, we were on the street, and all of a sudden there were women and kids being pushed directly towards us, with Charlie right behind them. Now Peter got known as Goldilocks. He was about 6'4", and he had the real blonde hair. And he jumped up, and it looked like it was straight out of the movies. "Fixed bayonets, follow me." Okay. So everybody just fixed bayonets, all 18 of us, and went through. They couldn't shoot because what they wanted us to do was shoot the civilians. So they got a propaganda victory. And if they didn't, well, there was roughly 100 of them. At the end of the day, there were 40 of them still there. And they weren't going anywhere. I got a scratch under here from one of their bayonets. In Berea there was. I mean, in actual fact, when we got into the centre of town on that, when we were trying to retake it, there was a number of them were hanging from lampposts. They had been the ones that had been selling, running shops and working with the Australians. But even later on, once they were out, we still had a reasonably good relationship. I felt safe walking around Berea in the normal part of the time. I mean, I was there at the second tour with the training team, and walk around all by myself with just a 45 on my hip and feel completely safe.
They had the orphanage there too, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was out of town. Yeah. That was now. Civil affairs were doing the main stuff of looking after that. The kids would all be there trying to get cigarettes, lollies, whatever, and they would help fill the sandbags when we're Because in the early days, every time you're in camp, you're out filling sandbags to put in more and more protection around your tents and your bunkers and all that. So yeah, you didn't come back and sit down and do nothing. You came back and you worked. When we came back in, because remember there was only 6 of us. A, I was happy. Hey, I'm alive. B, I was happy. Hey, I think I did a damn good job. And then we sat down for breakfast and I couldn't cut the eggs because my hands were shaking. But then I suppose that, and then Berea not long after that, you turned around and you had this sense of you just couldn't be touched. You really were going to just stroll through this. We were Supermen. But yeah, the first one, I mean, there was always that thought before you go into the first one, will I or will I not? And I don't think we had any in the battalion that didn't perform. I mean, there was one platoon in Charlie Company who actually in the whole 12 months never fired a shot in anger and never had a shot fired at them. They just happened to be in the wrong places at the wrong, or well, as we were saying later, the right place all the time. And it wasn't because they were trying to hide or anything, it was just they weren't there when it happened. The engineers built them, wooden buildings. There was one in the mess hall and the bar in each company area. The rest was 16 by 16 tents that we erected ourselves, and then you built sandbag walls around them, timber floor. The roads weren't too bad. Obviously they weren't sealed, but yeah, the engineers kept them graded and that. I mean, the engineers in the setup did a lot of the work digging with their equipment, digging the holes for the bunkers and helping they put up all the barbed wire around the whole place. So they did a hell of a lot of the work. But basically each company had 2 buildings and 16 by 16 tents to live in. There was a rule then with from the brigade commander or the task force commander, 2 cans per man per day, only while you're in base. Our company, in A company, the company sergeant major had a pit dug out the back of the bar so that we could throw empties in there, because the brigadier was known to turn up and have the garbage bins at the base emptied and the number of cans counted. That one particular brigadier. When he left, there wasn't a problem. We had our movie screen. It was outdoor movie theatre. You brought your own chair, your own raincoat, your own 6-pack, and rifle and ammunition when you went to the movies. I mean, one of the early ones we saw was To Sir with Love. And in that, there was not one of those soldiers, and obviously we've been in combat by then a few times, who left until that screen went blank. For some reason, it just resonated with everybody. So they were on every night, and I got to see one show that was one of the USO type shows that came in. That was down near the Lusker Field, which was in the main task force area. They never came out actually to the battalion areas. They had a stage and an amphitheatre type thing set up there. But only once when I was in was there a show on. I think they probably came in about once every month, but very rarely were we in base to do it. I was pulled out on the operation before the one that became Coral Balmoral, because A Company was staying in base as the defensive one, which happened quite often. They rotated through. And the SIG from B Company was actually going on R&R. So I went in and joined B Company as their SIG with Bert Irwin was the major. We'd done about 12 days, I think, in another area, and then we were picked up by helicopters, and we were being flown to be the first company on the ground at Coral to set the security so everybody else could fly in. Flying around, we were flying around for an extra hour and a half while we watched a battle on the ground between an American armoured unit and obviously VC of some sort. And we ended up landing, being told to land about 1,500 metres away from where the original site was supposed to be. So we did, but then the helicopters were almost out of fuel. They had to go back, so everything was delayed on that day, and that's why Coral on the first night was definitely not ready to be attacked. And we stayed there. The rest of 3 Battalion flew in and moved out. The start of 1 Battalion flew in and moved out. The first lot of guns were moved in, and then finally the final company of 1 Battalion moved in, and it would have been about 5:30 in the afternoon. And they were to take over from us as a defence, and we were to move out. We only got 700 metres before we had to set up. And we watched the attack that night on Coral, because and there was nothing we could do. They attacked from the one side where no infantry company was still not far away. We didn't, because we're on a different radio frequency, we didn't know everything was going, but we just knew it was one hell of a fight. And then next morning we were told to move and move fast. Now we were in an area, land cleared area as they called it. They'd been through the dozers and the chains between them, and all the trees were just lying on the ground. It was stinking hot. You were climbing over these trees. We were moving far faster than I think we should have. We had a firefight, probably 10:30, spotted a group that was obviously not us. And then we kept moving. By the end of the day, towards the end of the day, I think I was the last one to go, he lost 11 people with heat exhaustion because he's just pushing in that particular environment way too hard. The other 10, and it was always either one of the machine gunners or one of the radio operators, because they were carrying extra equipment. They had extra weight to what the normal soldier had. So yeah, there were 10 gone, and then they were waiting for it. They just had a helicopter to take one out, and all of a sudden I didn't know where I was, and when I woke up I was in an American hospital, and I woke up and some bloke was saying scalpel, and I said, I'm awake. He said, no, it's all right, we've put local anaesthetic. So they put, I had 2 drips in my arm just with heat stroke. So yeah, that was 3 days in there. I've got to say, I was the only Australian that got there. That was 25th of Act. The others have been picked up by the RAAF and were taken to Vung Tau. So I ended up in the officers' ward being very well looked after, thank you very much. And I almost had my Purple Heart. Somebody was coming in, pinning them on. And just before he got to me, the CO turned up just to check to see how I was. And then, what are you doing? He said, no, Australians don't get those things. Wow. But then once I got over that back, and that was when Balmoral was being set up, and A Company, well, the whole battalion. I think that was the only time in Balmoral where we had close to the full battalion on the ground. Every other time, you always had people. You had to lead people back for base security. You had people on leave. There were always, usually a platoon out on operations was somewhere between 19 and 21 men, not 34. So your companies were only about 60 people. But for Balmoral, they had just about everybody out there that could. Anybody that was fit and healthy was out there. So I was out of hospital, I was out there with A Company. The task force had 25 killed overall. Most of them were from the artillery on one battalion in the initial attack. The actual main attack on Balmoral all we had were wounds. I mean, our bunkers were brilliant. I mean, the engineers, American engineers, had come in and helped build them. The defensive position was really well done, although the one thing we'd all figured was that they would come through the jungle. And on 3 sides you had jungle right up to the wire. On the 4th side was an open field. They came across the open field, shoulder to shoulder in waves. Just turn around and say, right, I've been, the movie Gallipoli, I've said to her, I've been there, except I was sitting where the Turks were. And they just kept coming. The last major operation we had, which was once again was a 2-part one. We'd been out doing a 12-day, well, that was 2 weeks. And we moved from there to the new one, which was right up in the northwest of the actual province in the Maytao Mountains. And yeah, there was supposed to be, we were there more for reconnaissance, which was what the battalions were used for a lot in that 12-month period. The Americans would send an Australian battalion in to find, they know there's somebody there, you go and find them. Once we found them, the main part of them, we were back out and they would send in a brigade or whatever. But we were, once again, we're there to find something. They knew something was there but didn't know where or what. We've done a bit. We'd actually come across, well, going down one, found just a slit trench, big enough for 2 men, no more, no overhead cover, nothing there. Nothing on 100 metres either side, so right up, we kept going. And all of a sudden we had bunkers on either side of us. So right, that stopped the company and we were actually walking down between a row of bunkers that were 1,500 metres long. And it was 300 metres across at the end. We got a fight because there were some of them in the centre, a base protection type group, which didn't take much. I mean, they weren't enough to withstand an Australian company. But yeah, that was a huge complex, and it hadn't been long before when it was occupied. So righto, so we kept going, and then we stopped. We set up a base, and sent out a patrol, 2 platoon again. Went out to ambush a track junction. Set it up. Somebody came wandering down. They sprung the ambush, and all of a sudden, all hell broke loose. That junction was right on the edge of another big base. Horry Howard sent another platoon down on either end. So we had the whole company in line and we were getting hit. And fortunately, the helicopters were in and giving us cover to enough to withdraw. I mean, it was obviously, as we found out later, it was 275 Regiment, which had been the one that had been messed up like a mess in Long Tan, and it was now fully reformed and getting ready to go back into battle. There was no way we had the numbers, and they just couldn't get extras in, so we just had to back off. We'd just been resupplied with our food, so that was just stuck in the pit, grenades with pin pulled out next to it, hidden in it, and we left. And we went to D Company, then the next day we went out and were lifted out. Early 1970, called down to the adjutant's office and she said, "Oh, I've got you, here's the sign, here's your promotion to sergeant." And I thought, well, they did come true. And I was about to, she said, "But before you do it, there's a request that you go to the Australian Army Training Team, Vietnam, as a corporal." And I just signed it. There was no way you weren't going to take that job. They were already renowned throughout the army. So yeah, so that's how why they picked, well, apparently because it was training. I mean, they looked at, you needed to have good combat experience and you needed training. And so they, there I was off and did the training courses and all that sort of stuff. And next thing you know, we flew into Saigon and shipped off to do the 3-week American course, which really was almost a waste of time because all they were doing was repeating stuff. I know we spent one day, towards the end, just down from the training base, there was a helicopter company base, and we got to know them and got on with them, and their bar was open 24 hours a day. So sometimes, a couple of classes, they thought, there were 9 of us, 9 there, and for most of the classes, they only thought and we're split into 2 groups. They only thought they had 2 people from Australia in each class. We used to take it in turns of being there and not being there. And we were sitting there at the bar this day short, and they said, "Oh, look, you guys do anything tomorrow?" We said, "Well," he said, "Oh, we're part of a big insertion into Cambodia. Do you want to come along and fly as door gunners?" Try and stop us. So we were there early next morning. The first thing we got allocated to a chop. First thing we did, we cleaned our guns because the Americans aren't all that good at maintenance. And so we did 3 flights into Cambodia. We went to Hot LZs every time. And then we came back, and the next day the senior instructor finally found somebody who found me and called me down. He said, "I can't find your senior officers. I want to talk to all your people." And he was not, because none of us had turned up. So he come in, he looked, there's 9 of us sitting there, and he was not a very happy man. But yeah, and there we were in Phuoc Tuy province with the MAT team, Mobile Army Training Team. Our first job, the one I was in MAT 11, the first one, our first job was, and it started as soon as we got there, was a little village just on Route 52 between Saigon and, between Berea and Saigon, just outside Berea, was to train the PSDF, Popular Self-Defence Force. Kids, males under 16 or over 45, who were there. They had World War II weapons, and they were to patrol. We run the course, and the end of the 2-week program was theoretically you would take them out in a night ambush. And this little lot told us, well, look, if we go just this little bit further up the road here, every night Charlie goes across, comes from the sea and goes up into the mountains. Well, yeah, righto. Okay, we've got to do it, we'll do it. So we went up, walked past, went straight up the road. I hated that, but anyhow, we went straight up the road, turned around and come back. We were starting to set up the ambush. I had the M60, and I had trained 3 of the locals who had the ammunition belts all over them. And just after I got in position, before everybody else was, all of a sudden I got a group of about 7 walking across, coming up the other side of the road, walking straight at us. Well, there was nothing to do but start shooting. And the warrant officer thought that I was shooting at shadows until the group behind, who were doing rear protection, started shooting as well at a group back there. And we'd actually split a party that were going from the water through into the mountains. So these guys had told us the truth. Charlie crossed there most nights. So now the funny thing was, then they talked to a local Popular Force platoon and started putting shit on them because, hey, we had a go at Charlie, why haven't you? So that they came to us and said, we know where the base is in the bottom of the mountains, where they take this stuff. And we looked at it, we said, well, that's in Australian Task Force area. So we went up and told them and said, well, we don't go in that area because we don't go any closer than 500 metres to the border in case we run into South Vietnamese troops and we're shooting them instead of... So we said, right, well, can we take our people in and fix it up? Yeah, we'll make sure nobody's anywhere near you. And yeah, so went back and the platoon was very happy. And we went in and took out their little... It wasn't very well manned, but it was a base. And then that got the local RF company, Regional Force Company, saying, well, hang on, and really made it good. And that, actually, the interesting thing about that company, the company number was 445. So same as D445 from way before, except it didn't have the D on it. And you just worked with them, and they were good company. They were actually good units, and pretty well we were based then in the company that provided security for the RF rifle range. It was on the side of the mountains, and that was right beside Berea. But every night we were at least once out engaged with people that were trying to sneak in and out of Berea. So, yeah, and then from there we lost Blackhurst in the Long Highs, and I got moved from there down to work with MAT 3, which was working with 302 RF Battalion, and we had responsibility then for the Long Highs. And then we were moved to the Horseshoe. We still had the Long Highs and Datdo and the whole area. I was sitting in one of the bunkers on the perimeter defence during the day, which was always manned, in Nui Dat, and all of a sudden I just said, whoa, whoever came in to relieve me called up, they got the medics in and tested me, and I had malaria. I believe there was a big scream because there was, I think, nearly 200 of the battalion came down with malaria from that particular thing, and they were screaming we weren't taking our proper pills and all that. But then one battalion went in there to try and follow up, and they got 150 cases of malaria. So somebody did say, and the malaria that was there was just completely immune to what we were taking. So I was in the American hospital in Vung Tau for 6 days, and I said, right, you're cured, hang on a little bit, and yeah, righto. And I'm thinking, it's only 3 days till the boat sails. If I stay here longer, I don't have to get on the boat. And the day before the boat was due to sail, the doctor came in and said, right, yep, American doctor, you're discharged, out you go. No sooner did he left than the RAF doctor came in and said, who's here from 3 Battalion? And there were 3 of us. He said, right, you're all on the plane in 2 days' time. Thank you. Your team was usually somewhere between 4 and 6, and then the team would break up. Like when we were with the battalion, there were 7 of us, but you would go with, there would only be 1 or 2 go with a company. Now, there was one time before that when I was with 445, when I went out with one of the PF platoons, it was just me in the platoon. That one, somebody opened up at us and we had a little bit of but the platoon disappeared. And I had to use it. Every time you went out, you had spots pre-arranged for a helicopter pickup if there was a problem. And just had to call it in, and fortunately they actually came in with a couple of gunships as well that kept anything away from me and picked me up, and we never saw one member of that platoon again. They just disappeared. I was in contact 2 days out of every 3 on the first tour, and the second tour would be about the same. Yeah.
So that's a lot.
Yeah. Some were small, there was nothing came to the size of Balmoral, but yeah, there was, you were in contact pretty well, you went bush. There was something, I read it recently, where World War II, the average infantry soldier spent 40 days in a combat area each year. The average infantry soldier in Vietnam spent 40 days not in a bush danger situation each year. But yeah, you got used to it. I know that the first tour, towards the end, just before we hit that major one, there was one spot, and we only had about 2 weeks to go, and I'm walking along, and for the first time it hit me, you can get killed here. Up until then, I had no understanding that possibly I could go. But it was there, you could get killed here. And talking to others later, it hit everybody about the same time. When I came home the first time, there was only one good Vietnamese, and that's the one I had with my sights. Now, going back there and living with them, working with them, and to getting an arm, I thought, yeah, we should have been there. They needed that extra support, because you can't defend a whole country when somebody can pick off wherever they want to hit. So yeah, and I got to know them, and I still see some of them here every now and then. You did not feel good that we were being pulled out, not having finished the job. Probably the worst was, I had a absolute hatred of Australian media, because they played it the wrong way. The Tet Offensive was a magnificent victory on our part. Probably, if you want to compare it to something in World War II, it's the Battle of the Bulge, where a surprise attack has an initial benefit, and then it was an absolute defeat. The Tet Offensive was exactly the same, but in the media back home, all it was portrayed as was a victory for the VC. Well, no, they didn't win. They got pushed out of everywhere they took, and they lost thousands in that offensive. And in fact, the VC after that virtually ceased to exist. From there on, we were fighting North Vietnamese regulars, who were very well-trained soldiers, very well-trained. So yeah, I had, and that then, because it didn't help, that sort of added a little bit. When I was in Wagga, between the tours, on the Anzac Day, we marched as a unit, or the veterans marched in uniform in the Anzac Day parade in Wagga, and then were refused entry into the RSL. Did not go down very well at all amongst us. So yeah, we were bitter that we weren't recognised. We were never defeated, and yet they told us we lost the war. Well, sorry, no, we didn't lose the war. You lost the war back here in the in the politics and the media and there. On the second tour, because we went out with Vietnamese companies on operations. Now, their ration system was pretty poor. When they went out, all they had was the rice. You got to meet where somebody went and shot a deer or something, so you found that. A good company, the hunter went out just before dawn and got the deer. And then once he'd got it, you packed up, moved, and then you did your cooking and had breakfast, and then you moved on. A bad company used to go out on dusk, get the deer, and then you'd be sitting there where he's been shooting, and you'd say, oh, you've just told everybody right where we are. So you got to know, and really the companies were much dependent on the company commanders. A good company commander, you had a good company. 445, they were brilliant. Company commander was absolutely spot on. I was with another one for a brief period of time, and basically there was only a third of the company there any period of time. The rest were back on their farms. They used to come in on payday, get paid, and give half the money to the company commander, and then they go back to their farms. So yeah, there was, you had a lot of issues. But but the majority of the people were good. We got to know them. You got to live with them, and once they got to know you, that was a big thing. You had to get to know them. There was no good standing off and say, you've got to do this. That didn't work. Working with some of the as a corporal, you're trying to tell a major how to run his company or that. So there are ways to do it. We had a reputation that just was almost unbeatable. By the same token, when their troops that went out the bush, I would never, ever go bush their way. But that's the way they were trained. They went there in their larger groups, making noise, waiting to be attacked, and then they would mass it and really win it. Whereas I would much rather do our way, sneak around, do the initial attacking, and if you needed more, call it in. Yeah, but yeah, their way of doing, and having on their training course, you go into a lesson on an M60. There are 2 M60s in the classroom with an assistant instructor at each. There's an instructor out the front and he dictates. And the rest sit there and watch. You do not actually touch the gun. And the funny thing was, on that particular lesson, we got there early because it was our turn to do that lesson and the others were staying. And we stripped it. And I do mean we stripped this gun down to its bare parts, and the instructor come in, what? And so we, small bet of a certain amount of beer, that we could get it back together again before, and it was back together again, because we knew what we're doing. We'd done it, God knows how many times. And yeah, but he was absolutely amazed at just people who weren't specialist gunners could just strip one of these things and completely down, and then put it back together again in nothing flat. So yeah, but that was, you would have a class of 40 people sitting in there with 2 weapons, which are handled by assistant instructors, not by the students. And apparently, normally back in America, it's quite often it's a full company sitting there watching what's going on.
Different methods.
Different methods. You know, larger scale, so you've got to sort of fit to the scale.